Something worth mentioning is just the chaos that the hurricane storm has brought to the East Coast in the last 2 days. And I can say I was fairly fortunate in my location in New York, but I know a lot of friends who had, water leaking in, people's basements being completely flooded. There's videos you can see online where there's, it's like there's cars in the middle of a river effectively, but it's the street that, that they live on. And so it's something where, these kinds of storms are going to continue happening. Like we think of it as something novel, but it's going to increasingly become more and more normal. It has increasingly become more and more normal on the East Coast, at least.
Yeah, and I was saying before the show started, but I mean, Philadelphia, one of our main expressways was underwater. Like, we've never seen anything like this. And one thing I'm interested to see, a friend of mine I saw on Twitter who's also in Philly said like she overheard a few older people in her group saying like, this has made them like actually believe in climate change finally, and like maybe if there's any good thing about some of this is like it's becoming so real you just can't ignore it. And I do wonder, how the needle is going to move in terms of like, the average population or even many people that, they've believed in climate change, but like they haven't necessarily felt the urgency. They don't think it's the number one issue necessarily. I'm just curious how that's going to play out as a public. Just you can't ignore it anymore.
Right.
How that's going to intersect with what hopefully Sirota will talk about is like, Democrats not doing enough on climate, not going big and bold enough. But I do hope that, we're just reaching this point where it's becoming very hard for both the public and for politicians to ignore it or not doing something bold enough that's up to the task.
Yeah. To that point, I mean, in California, we're not dealing with flooding, quite the opposite. We're dealing with both a pretty severe drought and also on top of that, the wildfires that are becoming more and more ferocious every year. They're beginning earlier in the season, lasting far longer. And it's, I did a whole decode on how the fires are sparked by these awful private utility companies that don't invest in upgrading their equipment. But once those fires start, because of the conditions on the ground, it's incredibly difficult to put them out or to even control them. And yesterday, as I was like, of course, seeing all these images and videos of the flooding in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. And on top of that, the whole Supreme Court thing regarding Texas's anti-abortion law. It's just like, it's really difficult to like avoid feeling pretty extreme despair. But I think what gives me a little bit of hope is what you just mentioned, Paul. People who I would have never imagined being concerned about climate change because they were pretty dismissive of it earlier are now seeing the ramifications firsthand. And I hope that there's a sense of urgency to do something. I think our lawmakers are pretty disconnected from the realities of their own constituents and what they're going through, which is why someone like Joe Manchin could literally say that he wants to put a pause on the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, even as people are like dying in these,
right.
In these floods. But the fact of the matter is like people need to get active, right? We can't sit back and wait for politicians to look out for our best interests. I mean, we've seen how poorly that's played out for us so far.
Well, also, I'm thinking about the interview that we had last week with Matt Huber that people should check out. They haven't checked out. And one of the things that he's talking about is how, so much of the environmental movement for several decades has been not explicitly labeled as such, but in fact, in actuality, and what they're actually doing, the vast majority of it is just lifestyle politics, where it's you want to deal with this massive existential threat to the planet. Well, you should consume differently. You should buy better products. You should, pay a little bit more money in order to get the more recyclable version of whatever product that you're buying. Recycling. I mean, and obviously, there's things like paper straws or whatever. And I think some of the response to Huber when like he or others makes these points of like, that kind of politics is not effective on a number of counts, one of the responses is, well, but people are at least doing something. Isn't it good that they're contributing in some way? And what we should say, and what I'm saying now is we're on a live show, is like that's not enough. Like, and in fact, it's antithetical that you thinking that you're doing something because you're using a reusable bottle or a paper straw or something, and then patting yourself on the back like, oh well, it's a horrific, terrible situation that I see around me, but at least I did my part. Like, it deflates any possibilities for you to then end up in a greater, actual, real, effective political struggle. And I should actually preface, because it's potentially effective, that like it's our political efforts, what we're advocating for is, I think, the only real way that we're ever going to have a chance of combating climate change in any real way. And even still, there's no guarantee that we win, like, which means that it's not like there is not going to be a happy ending. And like, we have to actually affect and change the world around us in history ultimately. And if we fail to do that now, if we fail to act on this now, it really will mean something catastrophic in the future. And I think there's sometimes a danger in going overly catastrophic with these things, to say like,
Right.
we have 10 years, and if we don't solve it in 10 years, we're screwed. And then when 10 years comes around and we haven't solved it, it's going to become in a different way, it's deflationary.
Right.
But nevertheless, like, as I'm sure a lot of people are experiencing on the East Coast, people on the West Coast experience the summer with the wildfires, people across the world are experiencing in a myriad of different other weather-related ways. It's here. And it's not, you're not going to solve it on your own in any way. You necessarily have to find a way to contribute to a larger collective effort. And you have to fundamentally challenge those people that today structurally have financial and economic incentives to maintain the process that we're in going forward. Because they're not, the CEOs are not going to wake up tomorrow and go, yeah, I guess it is pretty bad. I guess we're going to completely dismantle the entire economic model that led up to this point and put me in the position I'm in. It's not going to happen.
Even if I at them on Twitter.
Yeah.
Even that. But yeah, I mean, I think we have this balance of like having to adjust to the new reality in a sense. And what I mean by that is like, we're increasingly at the stage where like, it's not that we're going to get rid of climate change totally, but we're going to be in a world where we are dealing with the effects of it. And the question is how we deal with it and how severe those effects are. And, and this is why I don't mean to open up this can of worms right now. We don't have to go into it. But like on the Jacobin show, we've been having guests on talking about nuclear power, which I know is very controversial, and it doesn't dismiss any concerns about nuclear energy like storage. But it's like, well, if we're now in this situation where the climate change is here and we're choosing between some climate change and runaway climate change, we might have to seriously consider some options of like, what can not release the most carbon at, as soon as possible. But, and where I do see, and I hate to say it this way as if any of this is like good, but like some opportunities also, and I've talked about this a lot as well, is with certain unions, especially building trades unions and fossil fuel unions, which is ultimately what we need to win over. And what I'm increasingly hearing now from those unions is not that there is no problem. I'm hearing them saying that, look, we know a transition needs to happen and we know it's going to happen. We just want it done in a way that protects workers. Mm-hmm. And we're even seeing this on the local level in Philadelphia. 5 years ago, we weren't getting the same traction with construction unions that we are now about, what do we do projects of renovating school buildings in an energy efficient way with union labor. And they're a lot more open to it because I think they're seeing like, we don't want this thing to come in a way that's non-union. We should get on board now for this transition. And I think there's some space for activists and like, especially leftist legislators, whether at the state, federal level, to be reaching out to these unions and saying like, look, let's be proactive and let's do this now before the green transition comes and it's just going to wipe labor out. So I think there are some opportunities I see.
Yeah. That was kind of like the missing link that we were discussing in the interview. I think it was last week, right? We interviewed Huber. Yeah. And I think he made a really great point about that. Like the fact that a lot of the climate activism kind of left out coordinating and working with labor, a labor-led movement, essentially, to do something about climate change. And I mean, I think that would be a far more powerful movement than just, what's been happening lately.
Right.
So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, if you treat environmental politics just like actual politics, like anything else, the left's answer has been and remains labor. Like, you're not going to get change unless you have like millions of working people organized in a way that they can actually leverage their collective power to challenge those who do in fact have power in our society.
If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.